All right. Hello. Um, yeah, so first of all, welcome to my video. I'm Cameron, because this might be viewed by people who don't know me. Um, yeah, welcome to our little prototype of a class that we're developing. So I'll get back to the class in a second. I'm going to kind of start off by just saying disclaimer. So this is a rough prototype that's primarily to serve so we can get some feedback for like further iteration of this class. So in that Google form feedback thing, please tell us what works and also what doesn't. Saying something like, oh, I like Bryson's video, just as that's not super helpful feedback. Like it feels good to be liked and everything, but it's much better if you can sort of tell us what worked with Bryson's video, or like what your thoughts are, what didn't work, or sort of what needs to be sort of reconfigured. Yeah, and then also just a disclaimer. So this is super low tech. You're viewing me screen recording my Zoom window. So I'm not even like recording a video, I guess. I'm just recording my screen, and then my screen happens to be showing myself. And so I have like my notes on the other half of the side. So if you see me like look like that, that's me looking at my notes. Anyway, okay, cool. So the course that we're sort of prototyping right now, the working title is Helps Approaches to ATS. So there's two acronyms in there. One is HELPS. So that's human, ethical, legal, phenomenological, and psychological, and social impacts, so two P's, impacts on advanced technology and society. So the course description is this course is designed to help understand the helps impacts of a tech-fused humanity in which the duality of body and technology gradually fades. The approach interrogates the future of life at the intersection of artificial intelligence, AR/VR, and then multi-sensory transfer. And those three things have been coined the silicarbon trifecta by Dr. Nick Zingale, who's a professor in urban studies here at Cleveland State. So just sort of as a preface, if I were teaching or co-teaching this particular class, I would probably, for this lecture at the very least, engage in more of a Socratic seminar-based thing, but this is a video. So it's going to be me having a discussion with myself and trying to make you, the viewer, feel most involved. So if I ever like pose a question, I'll answer it myself, and then it'll sort of be based on that. So just keep in mind that like if I ask a question, if I were actually teaching this, it would be probably more of a roundtable discussion for hopefully 10 to 15 minutes. So yeah. So I will sort of begin with the Turing test. So it was the Turing test, for those of you who aren't aware. So it was created by a man named Alan Turing. And so he was the primary subject of The Imitation Game, which is a movie that came out, and he was portrayed by Benedict Cumberbatch. So the point of the Turing test, as a side note, Alan Turing called it the Imitation Game, which is where the name comes from. But the point of the Turing test is to determine whether or not a computer can pass as being human. And so for like a practicality of how this would work, and I'm thinking about it in 2021 context, you would have someone called the interrogator having digital conversations with two entities. So this would probably take place in a chat room. And so the interrogator's job would be to determine whether or not they were having a conversation via text with a computer or a real person. So something is said to pass the Turing test if the interrogator is unable to distinguish whether or not they're having a conversation with a person. Some sort of examples of this is, like you're talking to Siri. She gives you sort of a response, and sometimes it's like weird, doesn't make sense, it's not how a human responds, so that wouldn't pass the Turing test. And so based on a brief Wikipedia kind of search, nothing has passed the Turing test to my knowledge so far. That might be wrong. But some critique of the Turing test is that the idea is that it measures intelligence, and that's not necessarily true. So one of the critiques, and again, this comes from Wikipedia, comes from Stuart J. Russell and Peter Norvig. So their critique is that the Turing test rather measures humanness rather than intelligence. The analogy they give is that aeronautical engineering does not define the goal of their field as making machines that fly so exactly that so that they can fool other pigeons. So sort of what that sort of means, breaking that down. The point of the Turing test is to see if a machine can act like a human, not if it could think intelligently. So with that definition, we're sort of saying that intelligence is the ability to think, but by the Turing test specifically measures not the ability to think, but the ability to think like a human, and that then express those thoughts in a way that another human interrogator might then be fooled. So the Turing test measure of humanness, it could be called a measure of intelligence. I think of it as a measure of humanness. And so let's see. Just as a video, I'm gonna show you a video of something that Google AI has sort of developed. So hopefully you can see this, and again, low tech. So what you're about to see is Google Duplex make a call for a hair appointment. And so the CEO of Google will kind of explain it.
With this problem. So let's go back to this example. Let's say you want to ask Google to make you a haircut appointment on Tuesday between 10 and noon. What happens is the Google Assistant makes the call seamlessly in the background for you. So what you're going to hear is the Google Assistant actually calling a real salon to schedule the appointment for you. Let's listen.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a woman's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have at 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Cool. Yeah. So I don't know. I just think that's a cool video. But it also definitely illustrates sort of, I don't know, the kind of broad concept of what I'm trying to talk about right here. And that is that artificial intelligence right now is sort of approaching a point where, at least in that example, for a very specific example, it can have conversations with people. So that sort of serves as sort of a prequel, and I know this video is at 9 minutes, it's probably going to run to around 15 minutes, to this sort of lecture that I'm calling Turing and What It Means to Be Human. And so I'm going to sort of qualify that I'm not an expert in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and that's sort of like what I'm going to be addressing. So the three sort of things that are talked about in helps: machine learning or artificial intelligence, AR, and then sensory transfer. So I'm talking about artificial intelligence right now. So again, not an expert in machine learning and artificial intelligence, but in general, the like AI that everyone is either scared or apprehensive or worried or even excited about, really at its core is just vectors and matrices of numbers getting multiplied together, and sometimes data is codified into numbers and then multiplied by through. And so that is someone who works in machine learning, sort of breaking it down into a very sort of, I don't know, cold kind of view of what it is. Like, granted, it's a powerful tool, but it's just numbers getting multiplied together. I will also say, though, that you could sort of look at humanity, and like if an alien were looking at humanity, you could say like, oh, or that's this alien rather, could say like, oh, look at them, you know, they're just like chemical reactions that are occurring inside of this like hard calcium bulb, you know, and yet they're capable of such beauty and compassion and empathy, but they're also capable of such violence and atrocities. And so one of the reasons I sort of draw a corollary between, you know, matrices being multiplied in the case of artificial intelligence and then chemical reactions in human intelligence is to sort of further draw a corollary between artificially intelligent thought and human thought. So the principal idea of machine learning or artificial intelligence, because I'll use those sort of synonymously and interchangeably for the purpose of this video, is making, so the purpose of artificial intelligence is making predictions based on previous observations. So if I give this artificial intelligence black box, this sort of black box of matrices, if I give it a lot of pictures and cats, a lot of pictures of cats and dogs, it'll be fantastic at identifying cats and dogs. I can give it a picture of virtually any cat and it'll tell me, hey, that's a cat. And if I give it a picture of a dog, it'll be like, hey, Cameron, that's a dog. But let's say I suddenly show it a picture of a bus, and it's only ever seen cats and dogs, so it has no idea what to do with that. And the reason it has no idea of what to do with a picture of a bus is that it has no experience with that image. And so you might be thinking, okay, well, hey, that's well all and good, Cameron, cool explanation of artificial intelligence from a very, you know, and I guess, you know, hand-wavy explanation. But what does that have to do with anything? And to answer that question, I'm going to ask another question. And my question is, how is that any different from us as humans? So let's imagine a person who'd been raised in a cave and they'd only ever seen cats and dogs. They'd be very familiar with cats and dogs, of course, and they would be, great at being able to see a cat, be like, hey, that's a cat. They actually might have a different name for it because they, have never interacted with a person before, so they wouldn't know our name for cats and dogs. But again, show that person a picture of a bus or show them a real bus, gonna have no idea what that is. They've only ever seen cats and dogs. So they have no experience with buses. And so we can also kind of extend this a little bit, sort of, getting away from an analogy of a person in a cave. So the follow-up question I have to this is, how do you know that if you drop a pen, I have a pen in my pocket, how do you know that if you drop a pen, it will fall to the ground? As a rational being, you know that gravity exists. So there's a force pulling on the pen that's going to pull it to the ground. And if you have, some sort of like engineering or physics or science background, you know that it falls at, 9.81 meters per second squared to 32.2 feet per second squared. But those numbers don't really answer the question of like how you know it will fall. And for me, at least, I can pick up this pen and I can like hold it right here and I know exactly what it's going to look like, sort of in my mind's eye. It might be right, but it's probably pretty close to right. And how do I have that? And so that's sort of because of the experience that I have with dropping pens. So I've dropped hundreds of pens in my lifetime. I've seen probably thousands of pens drop from friends, classmates, and then also just in movies. And this is also sort of mirrors the way that we as children learn intuitive physics. So, one of the reasons that play is so important for kids is by throwing stuff around, you learn physics, you learn how your body works, you also learn how the world around you works. And I think that's super cool. And sort of just to summarize sort of what we've gone over, looking at a super high level of things, of like the cognition of human versus machine, really not much difference. It's all kind of just pattern recognition based on experience. So in a sort of extension of that is this artificial intelligence that we've made. It's really just the computer's way of replicating our thinking. And again, we created it. But let's sort of take an emotional inventory. This is a rhetorical question because you're watching a video, but how do you feel? Sort of like I have this like kind of feeling that whenever people talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, you sort of, I don't know, you get kind of weary. Things are kind of weird. And so again, this is a video. If this were a real class, I would probably dig into that emotion and we could sort of talk about Freud. We could talk about how the monsters of society are reflections of our fears. And then we could also sort of like dig into the general fear of artificial intelligence. And then we might also look at two movies, one Ex Machina from 2014, and then the other one is Her from 2013. Again, if this were a real class, we could talk about how in one movie, Ex Machina, the AI is one part monster and one part, captive. And then in the other movie, the AI is the love interest. And, we could sort of talk about the implications of the name Ex Machina, how it's a nod to Deus Ex Machina, or in English, God from the Machine. And then we could sort of delve further into whether or not we're making our own gods as a society through the use of technology. We could also talk about choice, or the choice rather, to make both the AIs use feminine pronouns and then be voiced and portrayed by women, and then sort of what that means. But again, I said a 10-minute prototype. It's probably looking like 20 minutes. I'm not going to edit this down. I apologize. Thank you for your time. But feel free to talk with me about that. But instead, I'm going to talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence and sort of giving answers to the question, what makes us different than machines? And so I'm actually going to do that by asking another question. What is a difference between the way that we think and the way that machines think? So there's actually a paper that kind of talks about this, but I'll give a summary. So the paper's name is Continual Lifelong Learning with Neural Networks, a review. And that's by German Parisi et al. From 2019. And so neural networks is sort of a machine learning technique. So you can just sort of, whenever you hear neural networks, that is artificial intelligence for the purpose of this video. There's like specifics with different techniques and everything, but if you have no background with machine learning, you don't need to worry about that right now. Feel free to reach out to me if you're interested. But the short answer of this paper by Parisi is that humans are significantly better at accepting new information. So going back to our cat and dog and bus example. So if you were to show the person a picture of a bus or show them a bus, you could, simply say, hey, that's a bus. And then boom, they know what a bus is. They've seen a bus, they're aware of a bus, they know what a bus is. But for the artificial intelligence example, so you have this black box that's seen a lot of pictures of cats and dogs, you'd essentially have to make an entirely new black box for it to know what a bus is. So basically humans are better at accepting new information, and I think that's cool. It also, it's, I guess, what's the word for it? Validating, I guess, that, the brains that are chemical processes that have sort of been made over millennia of evolution are great, and, math that we've made in the past, 100 or so years is, still not there yet. But yeah, so our brains through the process of evolution, that's kind of hand wavy. I don't actually know if that's true or not, but our brains are significantly better at data processing. So we do such an amazing job of sort of knowing which experiences are significant and which to learn from, and then which experiences are sort of background and forgettable. And I will say, kind of as a side note, that if this were a real class, we could also sort of delve into sort of, I don't know, psychological disorders. So like anxiety, or nervousness, and sort of how that relates to like what experiences are more. So this would be more psychological than anything. I would have to read some psychological papers, maybe bring in someone who actually knows what they're talking about when it comes to psychology. Anywho, but so based on this paper, it seems like that's a current area of research, is how do we sort of be able to continuously iterate these, neural networks or artificial intelligences so that they can accept new information, and continuously get better. Because that's like what we do as humans, right? We live our lives, we're continuously intaking data, all these experiences, and then we're using that to make our own opinions and biases and decision making. And right now, based on this paper, it seems like we just don't have the technology to do that right now. We have to sort of specifically sit down, go through a training session with a neural network, then we get a neural network, and then it's like the shiny black box that you can't touch. You can use it, and it's super powerful to use it and like get new predictions from it, but you can't like put a little black box on top of the black box, or you can't make the black box bigger. You'd have to like sort of break it down and then make a new one. Maybe that's a bad analogy. And I'm at 22 minutes. I'm sorry. So that's my little prototype lecture. Sorry it went over. Double, in fact. But yeah, so if this were a real class, I would leave you with some ending questions, and then we could probably discuss those at the beginning of next class. I'll still leave you with the ending questions. So the questions are, so what does it mean to be human? If it's a matter of flesh and blood, does having more flesh and blood make me more of a human? I'm a pretty big person. Am I more human than other people? Is someone with a prosthetic limb less human? That's an implication of that definition. Is someone with a partially artificial brain less human, or some sort of brain implant? Are they less human? Are they more human? How much, let's say you have a person, you're replacing their brain with artificial brain, how much of the brain needs to be replaced before they're no longer human? And I've been focusing on the brain right now, but is it even the brain that makes us human, or is it something else? So thank you for watching my 23-minute video. Have a good day. This is 2 gigabytes, so I'm gonna have fun uploading this to YouTube. Maybe watch this on double speed. I hope you did.